understand, but like again, it's like that thing that like kind of pushes you off the cliff. And it was like I went and figured it out, and I like lied my way into a pretty decent job. So like lied on an application and somehow got a job.
All right, 2 questions. Where was the job? Do you even want to say?
Yeah.
Because you know what the next question is.
Love this one. It was Morgan Stanley at IBM. So Morgan Stanley is like one of the biggest financial wealth management companies in the world.
And what was the lie?
That I knew how to like do tech support, basically. Yeah. Dude, I don't know. I just like
I'm good at MySpace. I've
I was
got a
about to
sick
say,
song.
have you seen my background, my Louis Vuitton background on MySpace? I can code.
Yeah, I just like Googled like what the job's description said, and I just like filled in fake answers. And like this is at the time when I'm starting to realize like I'm like, oh, I'm good at talking to people. Like, you know, that's like I start realizing that's like a skill I have. Like people, like it's easy for me to talk to people. So I go to the interview and like it was just cakewalk. Yeah. And like I remember everybody always saying like, oh, job interviews are so hard. I'm like stressed, and I go in and it was just like, just sitting in there talking like I'm talking to a friend, whatever. And get a call back like 3 days later, and it's like, hey, we'd love to hire you. It's a 90-day paid training. So in my head, I'm like, well, I'm going to be making like what I'm going to make in these 90 days is more than I've made in like my whole life. You know, it was like a real people money. And I was like, well, if I don't like it, I can just like not go back after this training. Fuck it. And I find myself in this job like actually kind of liking what I'm doing. And like initially early on, it was basically just like taking phone calls from the people at these Morgan Stanley branches, like if something was broken, my monitor's not working or whatever it was. But at the same time, Morgan Stanley had just acquired another financial wealth management company called Smith Barney, and they were like converting everything into one. And by doing that, they were working on like cloud-based computers. So there would be a physical computer in front of you, and you would log into a computer somewhere else, basically. And in doing that, they were losing printers, so they couldn't print. And nobody knew how to figure it out. Like they were working with like high up people, like all the developers at like HP, and like nobody could figure out how to fix this problem. And there was a guy that I was working with. His name's Dalen. And me and Dalen were like sitting there bored one day at the end of the day, like not getting phone calls. And we were like digging around in like all these print settings. And I changed something. I forget what the mode was. I changed it. And the next morning we get a phone call saying like, hey, 10,000 pages printed on our printer last night. And it was all these jobs that were basically just like stuck in this lurch. And they all just printed. And so everybody was like, well, what the fuck happened? And they see that I was the last person in there. So like, you know, my boss's boss comes in and he's like, what did you do? And I'm like scared because I'm like, well, I lied to get this job.
I don't know really what I did.
I don't know what I did. And so I tell him, and he was like, wow, okay. We need you on a conference call in 30 minutes. And like, here's, you know, 19-year-old long-haired me just being like, I probably hadn't showered in like a week. Like, I was like, okay. And so go on this conference call, and I like get promoted to be like the head of printer escalation for Morgan Stanley.
That's so good.
So like me and this Dalen guy, we managed over like 50,000 printers for Morgan Stanley.
That's so good.
Isn't that crazy? Like,
and this is like 9 to 5.
9 to 5.
Yeah.
So like,
Office.
you know, still writing a lot, still super passionate, but it's like, you know, finding that first job, and I was like, oh shit, I'm good at this. So like, I wouldn't say like writing wasn't a priority, but like the idea of being like a professional bike rider, that like kind of damned in my brain. And I think a lot of that too was just like, you know, parents on me too, just being like, oh, that's a good job. You've got like a 401k and you've got health care. Like that stuff's important. And like, I'm fortunate that I have parents that are like looking out for me in that kind of way. But it also discouraged me a lot from like trying to pursue that alternative avenue earlier on in life.
Well, I mean, it's not just your parents. It's just like our society as a whole, you know, like you go to high school, you go to college, you get your big boy job or your big girl job, and you get married, buy a house, all that stuff. Yeah. So yeah, it's coming from every direction.
Totally. Yeah. But yeah, it was just like talking to them all the time. It was just like, that's who you're in front of. And like, they're looking out for your best interest. So I know there was no malice involved, but yeah, it was a tough thing where I was just like, cool, like this is what I do now. I just work here and I ride my bike for fun. And, you know, I was probably working there for about a year, and it started getting really dull, you know, and like I'm not riding my bike as much as I should, and probably drinking way more than I should be. Like I didn't drink all the way through high school. I didn't drink or do any drugs. And the end of high school. So I turned 19. It was 4th of July. We had like one of those big block parties at my parents' house. And that was the first time I ever drank. And like from there, it was just like, oh, this is fun. And I'm newly single, you know, and I'm just like, cool. I can just like hang out with girls and drink and like, yeah, riding bikes.
You have the money to buy the booze.
Yeah. I'm like working a real job and I'm stressed out when I get home. Like, so I just want to drink and not like go ride my bike. And at the time, like I didn't have, like Matt had moved away again. So like all my friends that I rode a bunch with were either moved away or also working full-time jobs. So like, fuck, man, well, this is what I do. But yeah, it starts getting dull, and like I'll never forget it, like driving down. So Highway 52 is the highway that I would drive from Frederick to like Boulder is where IBM is. And coming down Highway 52, it's like a big hill coming down and you can see IBM. And I remember driving in one morning, and I had ridden Sandstone Skate Park the night before until the lights went out, and it was like 11 o'clock, and I had to be at work at like 6:30, so I'm exhausted. And it like hit me. I'm like, dude, what the fuck am I doing? Like, this sucks, you know? And I like, the idea crossed my mind to like drive my car into the pole for some reason.
Just
like,
so you don't have to go to work.
Dude, you know, like I hate like admitting that, like, cause that's very real shit, but I felt that, you know, like, and like every day from there on, I started feeling like, man, if I just like crash my car, I don't have to go to work, you know? And like, that's a fucking
I don't want to necessarily die. I just want to hurt myself enough that I don't have to go to work.
Yeah, and it's like, that's a shitty fucking feeling to have, you know? And like, so I keep working there for a little bit, and like, you know, I start traveling quite a bit again. One of my good buddies, so I'm riding with Justin Bruner still, the guy I talked about earlier, and one of his buddies, Reed, I start riding with him a bunch more, so like start riding a bunch more. And yeah, it's like, okay, I need to like figure this out a little bit. And I was probably, I'm trying to think, mid what year would that be? 2011? Yeah, or end of 2011 is when I'm like processing all this stuff. And it's at the same time that I meet Cheyenne, which is my wife now. So that's when I was just like, okay, I should probably stop like partying as much, like. And I start kind of like reeling it back and like kind of refocusing on what I want to do. I'm like, okay, like I met this girl. She's super cool. She wouldn't give me the time of day. I'm trying to figure out how to make that work. So I'm like, well, if I like ride more bikes, she's probably going to think that's cool. So I start like riding pretty heavy again.
Girls love it when you do a skid or a wheelie.
Love that.
Love the wheelies.
Assumingly thinking that. And
can we insert a skid video of me right now? Just for any women watching.
Skids for the kids, dude. Yeah, so like that happens, and like, yeah, I'm like, okay, like this is like kind of a light at the end of this like tunnel of like wanting to drive my car into a fucking pole because I hate this job, you know?
Is it because of the job, or is it more of like you're thinking about BMX? Because when I was working in the oil fields, like all I thought about was racing. And that's what, it was like the salt in the wound.
Yo, that's exactly what it was. Like I'd be sitting there and just thinking about riding bikes, and I'd be like watching like videos on like Ride BMX and
Matt's out in California.
And like all my friends that I made that are, you know, living the dream now. I'm like, fuck, dude. Like, yeah, I don't know. And then so I meet Cheyenne, and like we I think I met her in like October of 2011, and so like it's kind of going into winter, so me and her start hanging out a lot more, and we started dating like 2012, like January, February. And she's like encouraging me to ride my bike. I'm like, fuck yeah, like this is cool, you know? So like start riding pretty heavy again, and do that for a little while, you know, like continue working that job. It's less painful now because like I have a really cool girlfriend, and she's telling me to go ride my bike, and like then I can hang out with her, and like life's good again, you know? But I'm still like not being fulfilled by that job. And I think it was towards the end of 2012 or so, November of 2012 rolls around, and I had kind of started like racing BMX a little bit again, like there would be like indoor races, and this was like a huge like bummer in life, like going to these races, and I reconnect with my buddy Jordan, that the first kid I ever see at the BMX track. And we're hanging out, and we're like, cool, we'll see each other tomorrow, like at the BMX racetrack again. Cool. And that next day, I get a phone call that he had taken his life. And that was like this big turning point in my life where I'm like, you know, I'm already thinking, like, what the fuck am I doing? That happens, and like I can't go to work for 2 weeks because I'm just like sick. you know, like my friend is like gone and nobody knows why, and like it was so fucking heavy. And that was kind of like the moment when I like really started thinking about like what I wanted to do with my life and how I didn't want to feel that feeling of like I hate what I'm doing every day.
That wake up call.
It was a wake up call, and it was so shitty because like I said, it was like I hung out with that dude the day before and everything was fine. It's like, and like I have always found myself like in depressive states, like, you know, feeling that same way, and I'm like, I need to figure out how to like not be in that headspace. And I also want to ride my bike because that's like what he loved to do. And like, yeah, it fucked me up for a little while, and basically that spurred me going on a trip to I want to say it was to Portland, and basically lost my job because, you know, I was so fucked up in the head from that. And then went on this trip that was like a month-long trip because I'd banked up all this vacation, and I was coming back from that trip and I was like a day late getting back, and I like called my manager. I was like, yo, dude, I'm not gonna make it in. He's like, you've missed too many days, you have to be here by noon tomorrow or else you're fired. And I was like freaking out, you know. I'm like, fuck, I'm gonna lose my job. Like, what am I gonna do? I don't have any bills. I had like a car payment, but I'm freaking out thinking it's the end of the world. And I didn't get back on time and lost my job. So that like
good thing,
yeah,
bad thing.
Well, it was a good thing, but at the same time, like me and Cheyenne, like we'd been dating for like 2 years at that point or something like that, and we were like kind of on rough road because she was going to school and I wasn't. Like same kind of thing, talking about like, you know, my parents were urging me to go to school or like get the job. Like I think her parents were probably looking at like, you're dating this dude, like what the fuck is he doing? All he talks about when he comes over is riding bikes. Like, what are you doing? So I think like there was probably some of that going on, and like, so, you know, I lose my job. 2 weeks later, me and Cheyenne break up, and I'm just like back in that spot where I was talking about in high school, where I was just like, you know, fuck everything. Like, I'm just going to send myself on my bike. And so just started like putting myself back in that spot. And like, I think it was like a solid year of just like really going for it. And then I got on a flow team for SE bikes, and I was just like, holy shit. Yeah. Like, this can be real again. And like,
how'd you get in touch with SE?
It was through, so I was working with a guy named Chris Olivier at Plus Size BMX. And it was like an online BMX website for like dirt jumpers basically, right? And I like became good friends with him, and he just like started plugging me in with all these people, and like he was like, hey, I see like that you're a good bike rider and that you're committed. And he started like looping me in from that point to like some of the business stuff he was doing. And I think I started learning a lot from him at that point of like, holy shit, like you can make a brand online. Like he had his own company, he had a website, and like, so I start like learning some little things here and there from him, and I'd like hold the camera for him sometimes and take a picture, and like he like takes me on a trip to St. Louis and Milwaukee, and like it was just like started turning into this cool thing. And like, yeah, then the SE thing materializes. I'm like, what the fuck?
I was about to say, there's so many good riders Midwest that just like aren't plugged in because they're not in California or those places. That the hardest thing is getting your foot in the door, not doing the tricks, not doing, you know, the hard work. It's literally just the connection and being like, hey, I'm Mike Murfitt.
It's who you know.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
And so like I got to give that dude massive props, because he just like starts introducing me to people, and like I get on SE, and then I get to go to Woodward West as visiting pro, and like, you know, I went there and rode a contest, but like it was just all you could ride was the contest stuff. You couldn't ride anything else. And you know, most people go to Woodward and like work as like staff in like a cabin or like helping the kids or whatever, but like I just got to go hang out. Like everything's paid for. I just got to go as visiting pro. And I was just like, this is insane to me, you know. Like went from working this job that was absolutely terrible, being so depressed and bummed out, and like then I lose my girlfriend, like all this shit, and then all of a sudden, like, you know, I'm getting free bikes, and I'm going to Woodward West as visiting pro, and like cool, I'm a bike rider now.
So what do you think was that choice? Because as so many of our listeners and what have you will understand, that you got that broken heart, you're depressed, you got fired from your job or something, and you said earlier that you were into booze a wee bit, but obviously reeled that back. At that point, was there a fork in the road as far as just like, well, shit, I can spend my whole time at the bar getting drunk, or I'm going to go ride my bike. And obviously you took the bike avenue. Was that even something in your mind? Did that even cross your mind to be all like, fuck this, I'm just going to go to the pub?
Yeah, I mean, I think I tried to like reel myself back on the drinking like after Jordan passed away, because I knew that was like a pretty slippery slope for me. Like I know I have a really addictive personality, so like tried to like chill, like just myself. I was like, okay, you need to chill on that, like go ride your bike. And like you talked about it a little bit on your podcast, but like nothing's free, right? So like if you like drink, then I would like the hangover thing. I was just like, dude, I can't be this bummed out and like be hungover and not go ride my bike, you know? Like I didn't feel comfortable putting myself in that position. So yeah, I just started like riding nonstop, and like I didn't have a job, you know? Like so at that point I was just like starting to ride as much as I could. And I think I had bought a fixie at the time, so I would just like go ride for like 30 miles and come home. And like this is around the same time my dad is like, hey, you should go on a mountain bike ride with me. I'm like, dude, if you're doing it, that shit has to be so lame. Like I remember like he started riding mountain bikes when we still had the sand lot. Like me and Matt would be out there like digging, and like he would come home like covered in mud, and he'd just be so stoked, and we'd be like, what a fucking nerd, dude. Like,
what are you doing out there?
Yeah, like whatever you're doing has to be lame because you're my dad, and like,
Do you
know,
see these jumps?
Yeah, exactly. Like, dude, that's lame. You're pedaling up a hill, like sounds stupid. Yeah. And I go on a mountain bike ride with my dad, go on another one with him, and he was like, hey dude, like I'm buying you a mountain bike. I was like, dude, don't waste your money. Like I'm not gonna freaking ride that stupid thing. So he buys me a mountain bike, and so we start riding mountain bikes quite a bit. So I'm like doing this like heavy rotation of like, you know, I'd ride my fixed gear in the morning and like go get a coffee somewhere, and then ride my BMX bike, or ride mountain bikes, and then ride the BMX bike at night when the lights were on at the skate park.
Jesus.
And so inadvertently, I'm like, I get insanely fit, dude. Like, I see photos of myself from that point in life, and I'm just like, dude, what? Like, it's insane, dude. And it had been like a year of me and Cheyenne being split up, and it was it was my buddy Jordan's birthday, and she had texted me. It was like almost a year to the day that me and her had split up. And she was like, hey, like we hadn't talked in months. And she's like, hey, I know this is probably a really hard day for you, so if you need anything, let me know. And I was like, I wanted not to like respond, because I had just gotten to this point where I was like okay with thinking that nothing would ever materialize there. Like I was madly in love, you know, and like so I text her back, and like we start hanging out again. And one of the big reasons that she said, she like always jokes around, she's like, if you wouldn't have been in such good shape, I don't know if we'd be dating again. But like,
gosh. Thanks, Dad.
Yeah, straight up, dude. Like literally I remember seeing each other the first time, and it was like 110 degrees outside. We like met at this like hiking trail, and I didn't have a shirt on. And like that's what she always goes back to. She's like, I remember that day, and I was just like, what happened? You know, because like before that, you know, being like bummed and depressed, and like going through like my buddy passing away and all that stuff, and like drinking and not riding a bunch, like just put on weight, you know, and like. Yeah, so then being in that space of just like hurting and like just wanting to be in my own head, like just riding bikes, I just like put myself in this super fit state, which was super cool. Dude, so it worked out. Yeah.
You're riding a bunch of mountain bikes, and how does that all tie in?
Yeah, so, you know, BMX is my main thing, and I think I went from riding for SE bikes to free agent bikes, which was really cool because like going back to the beginning of this episode, I said, one of the first real BMX bike I bought was a free agent. So it was cool to like see that tie full circle, right? Like to get like the free agent, you know, ride and like free frames, and like I was like, this is so cool. A little bit of a travel budget. And I was riding for them for like 4 or 5 months, and my dad's friend JB tells my dad like, hey, there's Oscar Blues has a bike company called Reeb, and they're looking for like somebody to ride for them for BMX stuff. And the guy that's like the marketing guy from Oscar Blues, and he rides mountain bikes. He goes on these Tuesday night rides with a group up in Lyons. And you should make Junior go. And so my dad's like, hey, here's some lights for your bike. Go ride with these guys. And I had ridden like mountain bikes like 6 or 7 times at this point in time. And I go and show up, and all these dudes are in like their mid 40s, some in their early 50s. And I'm like, you know, so young, just like sitting in the parking lot like, what the fuck, dude?
Thanks, Dad.
Yeah. And so go and like start going on these rides and like start becoming better friends with Chad, who was the marketing guy. Chad Malis, he was marketing guy at Oscar Blues. He's like the dude that made Oscar Blues cool. You know, it's super cool. A lot of respect for that dude. But yeah, start like going on these rides and like start earning his respect. And like I'll never forget, you know, kind of like probing him, being like, hey, like how would this work out? Is this gonna be a thing? And like he always kind of just like, I wouldn't say he wrote me off, but he just didn't know me. He didn't trust me yet. And so I just kept coming on these rides and like learned to love mountain biking through that. And like it was so fun, you know, and like we're riding everything at night. So you don't really get a perspective of how gnarly this shit is. Especially the stuff that all those guys like to ride, like a bunch of like rogue illegal trail. Like there's like cliff faces, but you're riding it at night so you can't see. And we went camping. So the group of guys that I was riding with, they call themselves the Fuckers, the Front Range Underground Cycling Club with a K, ERS. And so they had this, like, every year they would do a thing called Fuckers Fest, and it would just be everybody goes camping together. And we were sitting around the fire, and I don't know how it came up, but I was sitting there talking to Chad about the Reeb thing. And I don't know if he'll remember it, but he jokingly was like, if all these old chubs are gone by the morning, we'll talk about you riding for Reeb. And there was like 8 old chubs, and it's an 8% beer. And so another one of the guys that was riding with us, his name's Eric Bergman, who's like one of my good friends now. He's from Wisconsin, so he's a good old boy. He's a drinker, you know, and he was up there and he had a broken collarbone. So he's like drunk driving a side-by-side around. Like every time he was getting a beer, he would get in a side-by-side, drive to the cooler, get a beer, and drive it back. Like, so he's like, oh, we can finish those. Chad goes to sleep. Our dumbasses drink the rest of the beers. You know, we didn't pour them out like we should have. And so we're so like hungover the next day, go for a bike ride and puke my brains out. And Chad's like, meet me at the brewery on Tuesday or whatever. Let's talk. I'm like, oh shit. So yeah, I go sit down and talk with Chad and Tim Moore from Reeb, and the Reeb thing comes to be. And so yeah, they're like, we'll give you whatever free agent's giving you. Sick. And I was like, what about beer? Do I get free beer? And they're like, yeah, I'm sure we could work that out. So I start getting free beer, like basically they call it e-beer, like employee beer. It was like the beers that were low fills or dented. Just like basically like meet the guy at the brewery and he's like, yeah, just take as much as you want whenever you want. So I'm like, okay, this is the sickest thing that's ever happened to me, you know? Like working these lame jobs that I hated, it's like all paying off now. And
that nice body I had.
Yeah, it's gone.
It's gone.
And yeah, at the same time, I'm like, I had started working another office job just to make ends meet so I could like start riding. But now I'm like, cool, I'm riding for like this dream company, and I get to design my own BMX frame, which was insane to me, you know? So I'm like, okay, I like this, and this, like basically like Frankenstein to bike together. And that's when I meet Chris Solfrane, which is kind of the reason he is the entire reason that we're in 100%. The building right now that we're in where we roast. And me and Chris just like hit it off immediately. And Chris, like, I get to be there for the whole process of him building my bike. In fact, I'm like cutting the tubing, you know, like that was insane to me, like getting to cut it and like miter it with him and like seeing him like weld it all together. It was like so bizarre. And yeah, shout out to Chris because he's the freaking man.
He is the man.
Do you still have one of these frames?
I have both of them. Yeah.
Oh, sick. Okay.
Well, that's like the other crazy thing is like, you know, I was breaking these like SE frames and the free agent frames left and right. And I rode my first Reeb frame for like 2.5 years. And like Chris put it back in the jig to like make sure that it was all lined up to the next one he was going to build for me. And it was perfectly true. Damn. So like that's like just shows you like what good American manufacturing will do, you know, like good material, good American manufacturing. Like it was like 2.5 years. So I was like, I should probably get another frame, but like I could probably still be riding that thing. It was bulletproof, dude. But yeah, that was like a pretty cool era, like getting hooked up with that. And then
during this era, like you said that you're still working like office jobs here and there or what have you, but you're obviously riding. And then were you seeing like a glimmer? Were you seeing something that was attracting you to, hey, maybe I can do something that isn't this stereotypical 9-to-5 office job. Maybe there's something through Reeb. Maybe there's something through Oscar Blues or something.
Yeah, so I'm like looking around. I'm still maybe thinking about like going to college. I was like, maybe I could. Like I at one point I really wanted to be a pilot or an X-ray tech. And like the X-ray tech thing, I was like,
because there's so much similarities.
I know,
between
two
those
totally
two.
different
Yeah.
things. And the X-ray tech thing was like, well, I've been hurt so many times. And like I've had good X-ray techs and bad X-ray techs, and the good ones like make you feel comfortable when you're laying in there like in so much pain, like. Or you have the bad one who's having a bad day and they're like moving your arm around. And you're like, dude, that shit is broken. Chill. So I was like thinking about that, and I'm like working this office job, and the company I was working for, we did like FMLA job leave, like outsourcing for HR departments.
What is FMLA?
Family Medical Leave Act. So like,
Right.
yeah, it's an American thing.
Yeah.
It like covers you if like somebody in your family gets sick, or if you get sick, like you can't, it's not paid leave, but you're covered by the government to not get fired. So that's what I was doing. And like, again, it was another one of those companies that's like, I'm getting paid well. I was in charge of some people. It was super cool. Like, but I wasn't being fulfilled. And like, you know, my BMX career is kind of like actually happening. And, yeah, so I'm like, I just didn't really understand at this point, like how my skill set like could apply outside of like working in an office, you know, like I knew I was good at like posting stuff on the internet, but I didn't know like marketing was a job. I didn't understand what that was, like, or like, you know, that you could take photos and get paid for that, or like the design didn't even cross my mind. None of this stuff did. Like I just didn't know, like, and I think, you know, growing up in a household that like nobody did those kind of things. Like, no, my mom always took photos, but she was not a photographer. You know, nobody knew marketing stuff. So like, it's just like that out of sight, out of mind kind of thing. So yeah, the office jobs is what it was. And so I start writing for Reeb, and I found out that Dale, the guy who started Oscar Blues and owned Reeb, he had a big pink Camaro that we talked about in the Traction episode. I'll put it in here too, just so everybody can see it.
22s on it?
32s.
Really?
Big, yeah, big,
Oh,
dude.
They're insane.
Yeah,
Literally,
I saw the picture. Yeah, just
so
didn't know the made wheels.
it was one of the members of Outkast, Big Boy. It was his car, and I think he went to jail or something, and the car got seized and sold at auction. And like, Dale was at auction, and I guess he bought this car, like kind of as a joke. I don't know the whole story, but it's on 32-inch spinners, painted candy pink. And I like catch wind of this, like, because I'm hanging out at the brewery quite a bit at this point, like making friends. Just like, I'm starting to understand it's that thing of like, it's who you know. So I'm just hanging out there. Like, I don't know where it's going to go, but I'm stoked that I get to drink beer for free and like get to hang out with cool people. And they also had go-karts at the brewery at the time. So I would drink like 6 beers and just go drift go-karts. And that was sick, you know, like
Put
literally.
it through the wall.
Yeah, I put a go-kart through the wall before I worked at the brewery. And shout out to 𝙎𝘾𝘼𝙍𝙈𝙍𝙈 because he's the freaking man. But yeah, he's like he looks like a Viking, dude. Like he could punch a hole through a human for sure. Dude is so sick. But
laid the law after you
dude,
broke the wall.
well, they
down.
made me like write my name on the wall. They're like, you fucked it up, dude. Write your name on the wall. Jim's gonna be pissed. And I was like, I don't know who this guy is. Reeb sends me on a trip to go to Burning Can, which was Oscar Blues' big beer festival. And it was in Brevard, North Carolina, which is where one of Oscar Blues' breweries is. And who's sitting next to me on the plane? Jim Weatherwax.
He's like,
That's how we meet each other.
You're the dipshit that put the hole in my wall.
Yeah, he was like, wait, Murph? Huh. You put the go-kart through my fucking wall. And like, he's like the nicest, softest teddy bear in the world, but he can like be very intimidating. And like, I didn't know the dude, and he's like big, like scary looking guy. I was just like, oh fuck, dude. And like, I have to sit next to him all this whole flight, but we ended up becoming good friends after that trip. And yeah, come home, find out about that big donk pink car. And I think I told Chad, and he's like, cool, I'll put it together. So we bring the car over to the brewery, and it gets there, and I'm like, holy fuck, I don't know how I'm jumping over this thing. It's like 7 feet tall. It's tall. I'm like, oh shit. So I'm like looking at all the loading docks, like where the trucks back up to receive beer, and I find one, but I had to like sprint through a door and like pop a wheelie and turn my handlebars, put it down, take another pedal, pop a wheelie and turn the handlebars, and then bunny hop immediately over this car.
Jesus.
And you know, I'm looking at it, and my buddy Matt's there. He's in town, so he's like, I'll shoot the photo. And I had never met Dale up until this point. And Dale walks around the corner with this whole tour of people from New Orleans Brewing Company or something. I think it was from New Orleans Brewing Company. There was like 30 people. And like, if you look in the photo, like in the top, you can see feet hanging off the roof. There's people like sitting on the roof. So there's like an audience of like 30 people. And I'm like, fuck, dude. Like, this is going to be so scary.
Just tomahawk yourself.
So,
in front of an audience.
well, yeah. And, like, you know, I don't know Dale at this point. And, like, I don't know how much this car's worth. Yeah. So I'm like, I can't fuck up any of this. So the first one I do, I pull back and my bars are just in my lap. And I'm like, well, I'm looping out and dying. I don't have brakes on my bike. So I just, like, sat on the tire as hard as I could so I didn't die. God. Broke my seat clean off in half. So I have to, like, go take Matt's seat off his bike, put it on, like, come back and do it again. And Matt's like, oh, I kind of fucked up. Can you do it one more time? So I do it a third time.
Of course.
And we're stoked, you know, get the photo. Go up front and start drinking beers. And I come back to the back to get my bike. And Dale had a little coffee roaster, a Probatino, like a 1 kilo, tiny little thing. And he was roasting coffee. I was like, oh, dude, that's sick. Like, and from traveling, riding BMX, I'd go into these coffee shops where people were roasting coffee. So I knew what that was, and I start talking to him about it. And, yeah, he was like, well, that's really cool, you know, about this stuff. Like, you ever thought about working in coffee? Da-da-da-da. That was kind of the end of that conversation.
For those that don't know, he had spun off a different company.
Yeah, it was called 𝙎𝘾𝘼𝙍𝙈𝙇 Beans at the time, which is super funny to me, like just a super random name. And they were canning up coffee beans in crowler cans, like 32-ounce beer cans. And so this guy Derek starts working for Dale. Like Derek, they call him, I can't remember what they called him at the brewery, but he was like the kid that just did everything nobody wanted to do. But he wanted a job at Oscar Blue so bad. But he had roasted coffee, so he kind of got like pushed into 𝙎𝘾𝘼𝙍𝙬 Beans. And so he hits me up on Instagram. He's like, hey, I see that you're riding for Reeb. You want to ride for 𝙎𝘾𝘼𝙍𝙬 Beans too? I was like, sure. So they start throwing me some coffee, and the other partner in Hotbox, his name's JR, John Ralston, and I see him one day up at the tap room at the brewery, and we start talking, and he's like, oh yeah, Dale told me a little bit about you. We get to talking about like social media and stuff, and I'm like, yeah, I'm good at posting on Instagram. And he's like, oh, we really need that. And like, I'm like, yeah, I can take really good pictures. I've never used a real camera before, you know. He's like, well, let's sit down the end of this week and talk. So sit down with him, and I walk out of that meeting with a job at a coffee roasting company. He's like, if you want it, it's yours. So I remember like calling my dad and telling him, and like, I wouldn't say he was discouraging, but he wasn't encouraging, you know, like he was just like, well, where you're at now, it's like you're getting paid well, you know, like just that comfortable lifestyle of like, he saw that like I was in a good spot. He's like, you got a 401k, you got health insurance, like
you got stability.
Don't give that up. Don't give that up. Like, and I was just like, but Cheyenne, you know, me and Cheyenne are dating again at this time, and I'm like telling her what I'm thinking, and she's like, dude, just fucking do it. Just do it.
Dude, that's so
like,
right.
What do you have to lose? You know, and it's like, it's that tough thing where it's like your parents are in your ear telling you one thing. And again, I get it now, like the older I'm getting, where it's like stable is good. I get that, but like it's not fulfilling to me. And so, yeah, I like make this leap, and like I don't think my parents really understood, or like I don't want to say they didn't support it, but like they just were like, ugh, for a little while until they saw it starting to work. And like, yeah, I get into Hotbox, and I'm just like, well, we rebrand it from 𝙎𝘾𝘼𝙍𝙬 Beans to Hotbox as I start coming in, and like we're like, okay, what am I gonna do? I don't even know what I'm doing here, you know. So
you find yourself, what's your first? So you're posting on Instagram.
Yeah, like, my job was like Instagram and like local sales, which I had never done either. And so I start like running out and doing, you know, going to accounts, like learning how to do that. And we hire a sales rep right about the same time too. So I kind of just like learning from him, and I'm like, cool, like I'll take on like the website, like adding products and stuff. So don't know how to do that. So I'm like looking on YouTube, trying to figure that out, and you know, trying to figure out what I'm posting on Instagram, you know, just to post. I'm not thinking about like strategy.
So
or
you're pretty much
like
in
that.
College.
Yeah.
You're learning.
Yeah. And so I remember trying to add a product to that website, and we're like a month into me working there, and I couldn't do it. And so I'm like, Derek, does your login have a way to add products? No. So I like call the agency that was running the website for us, and they're like, oh yeah, it's because you guys don't have admin credentials. I was like, well, can you add that to my thing? No. It's like, okay, why not? Well, you don't know what the fuck you're doing.
Yeah.
And rightfully so, I didn't know what the fuck I was doing.
Yeah.
But so I like tell JR that, and he was like, well, that's not acceptable. He's like, we should fire them. He's like, you want to fire them? And I was like, I don't know. Can I do that? I'm 23 years old, you know, like, he's like, yeah, call a meeting. Let's fire him. And like they had spent like $15,000 on this website and it was bad, dude. Yeah. So yeah, I get to fire this company, which was super cool. And like in that meeting, they're like, this was on a Wednesday, I think. And they're like, okay, by Friday, you have to have it off our server and you have to have it like on your own server.
Did you get to say the words yourself? Like, hey, sorry.
I was super nervous. It was probably something like this isn't going to work out or something like that.
Like
JR probably finished it out for me. But we fired them and I had to figure out how to like, I'm fully telling everybody, oh yeah, I totally know how to do this. Like, fuck, dude, I don't know how to move a website off a server. Like, what the fuck does that mean? And so I like call one of my buddies who's down in Florida that I had met through Chris at Plus Size BMX. I'm like, dude, I know you work on WordPress. Like, what do I fucking do? And he's like, oh, I'll do it for you. It's not a big deal. So he like does it for us for free. I'm like, dude, we're willing to pay, but like, he's like, nah, like Oscar Blues is cool. Just like give me some free beers next time I'm out there.
That's so
sick.
Yeah.
So like, you know, I get the website and I start adding products and like the shittiest product photos and like, yeah, it's bad. It's really bad. And I was probably like 8 months into Hotbox and Dale bought another coffee company. They made cold brew coffee, and our big goal was to start making 12-ounce cans of nitro cold brew. That was going to be our big seller. And these guys basically duped him into believing that they could make that happen. And so these guys come in, JR gets phased out basically, and these guys were like, they had just finished like an MBA business program. Like they were really good at spreadsheets, but not good at much else except for like blowing hot air. So me and these guys, like being the person who's like, I'm just going to do the work. Like if the work's in front of me, like talking about the BMX stuff, like if I can see the work that needs to be done, it's going to get done.
And were you being fulfilled at this time with this job?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it was just one of those things where I was thrown full into the deep end. And I was getting to ride my bike. Like I was posting clips of me riding BMX as my job on the fucking company Instagram account.
Yeah.
And people were loving it, you know? Like that was cool. I'm like, I'm a pro bike rider. I'm getting paid to fucking post myself on Instagram, you know? Like how cool is that? And so, yeah, these guys come in and they just really start kind of like wreaking havoc and like the fulfillment level drops really quick, you know? Yeah. And Derek gets fired and I'm basically the only one doing anything for Hotbox. So at this point I start learning really quick, you know? I learn how to roast coffee. Like Derek had shown me a few things and I start like getting real deep into that, and I'm like roasting the coffee, delivering the coffee, posting on Instagram, running the website. I'm doing everything pretty much solo. And at this point, those guys hire another girl named Laura, who ends up being a really good friend of mine. And she had like some Photoshop experience. So she kind of showed me a little bit of that stuff. But I was just like, you do that. Like, I'll tell you what I want it to look like. You do it. And those guys eventually get fired, which was like such a burden off my shoulders. And it was about that same time I'd gone on a mountain bike trip, and my buddy Mike Eldridge hits me up and he's like, dude, that looks so fun, blah, blah, blah. He had moved to California with his ex-fiance, and they had split up. And so he's out in California bummed out because he wants to be back in Colorado. And he went to school for like digital marketing, photography, design, all the cool shit. And I was like, well, move back. What do you have to lose? Come live on my couch. And so that's what he did. And he starts showing me how to use a camera. And we start going on these mountain bike trips. And I remember we were in Salida, and there was a girl who worked. She was a brand manager, I think, for New Belgium. And she was like, yeah, I've seen Hotbox stuff everywhere, but I just don't get it. And I was like, what do you mean you don't get it? She's like, well, your website looks like this, and your van that's wrapped looks like this, and your business cards look like this. Like, the brand was just all over the place. And, like, I didn't know that. Like, how would you know unless you know, like, making a brand very linear and, like, make sense is very important. So she, like, tells me that, and I'm like, holy shit. We're fucking up, dude. And like Oscar Blues was kind of always that way, where it was hodgepodge and there was never like a serious plan. It just like everybody worked really hard and ran in the same direction, and it worked somehow, which is crazy to me. But we were kind of following suit, and I was like, well, like, let's get a little more strategic. Eldridge is living with me, and I'm like, hey, how do I change the colors of this logo? And so he shows me in Illustrator how you change the colors, and he's like helping me update the website and making the brand feel a little bit more congruent, like put together. And like at this point, I'm like really starting to figure out, I'm like, okay, like I'm really good with relationships. I'm really good with like having a vision and seeing what I want something to be. I want to be able to do this myself though, like pull the levers and make the changes and make the shit happen. But I'm so busy. I'm in the weeds with like making cold brew, roasting coffee, delivering stuff. And Eldridge is living on my couch, and I like go home every day and just be like, I want to do cool shit. Like this company could be so cool. Like I want to do cool shit with it. And we'd probably smoked a little bit of weed, and we were sitting on the couch, and GoPro had just come out with the GoPro Hero 5, I think it was. And the highlight reel for that was like based around like a family driving around in their Volkswagen van, like on the West Coast. And it was like this little red Volkswagen van. And I was like, holy shit, that's really cool. Why don't we drive around the country in our wrapped van and like give out cold brew? So something like clicked. And the reason it clicked is we had a red Volkswagen Sportsmobile van in our roastery. So I was like, well, we could drive that. And quickly came to realization that like driving a Volkswagen around the country would probably be pretty miserable. So we start planning this like 12-week long trip. And this is when like I think my life really starts to change into like what I'm doing now, right? Where it's like I'm starting to figure out like how to approach a brand. Like we made an 80-page deck and then like a 10-page pitch deck, and like so we could go to brands. Like first we had to sell it to Dale. And so we're asking for an absurd amount of money because we're driving around the country. We have to find people that can do the work while we're gone. I'm
sorry to cut you off. How scary was it to pitch that to Dale?
Oh, terrifying.
I bet.
That was like probably scarier than anything I've ever done on a bike, honestly. Because like, we'd
worked.
How
that works.
Yeah, we'd worked on this project for 4 months, 5 months. Like it would be work all day long, and I'm probably working 60 hours, 70 hours a week during the day at Hotbox, because I was pretty much solo mission on most stuff. And then I would come home and work on that till 3 or 4 in the morning with Eldridge, and wake up and do it again. And like at the same time, we're like cranking cold brew out. And like I just talked about this with somebody yesterday actually, but like one of the, like I feel like now it's super fucking funny to me, but one of the lowest moments working at Hotbox was we had, I think it was, 4,800 can order of cold brew going to Whole Foods.
Yeah.
And it was their first purchase order with us. So like you can't fuck that up or else it doesn't happen again. And we were canning, everything was going smooth. The first pallet's done, and we're starting to move into the second pallet, and no more liquids coming out of the tank. What the fuck? And I'm like supposed to be home in like 2 or 3 hours to start working on this project again with Eldridge. And I'm like, okay, what the fuck is going on? So it was me and a guy who was working he came over with the guys, those NBA guys.
Yeah.
And I hated him at first, but he ended up being one of the most hardworking, coolest dudes that I know. His name's Nate Hurst. And so it's me and Nate, and we're canning this cold brew. We're there by ourselves. And like, we're like, why is there nothing coming out of this tank? And we would have to use these like basically big tea bags full of like 60 pounds of ground coffee to steep the cold brew. And we didn't realize that we needed to put a false bottom on the floor of the tank, or the tea bag would suck down through like the port in the bottom. Shit. So we like try to close the butterfly valve so we can take the hose off to see if there's a clog. Butterfly valve won't close. And we both look at each other and we're like, oh no, dude. This pipe that goes down to where you connect the hose to is like 3 feet long. I'm like, that bag is all the way in there.
Yeah.
So we try everything. We try and push water back up in there. We try and push pressure. Like the tank's under 30 PSI already, so we have to let all the pressure out. And we're like trying to push it back. Nothing's happening. And mind you, we only have 1 pallet of this 2-pallet order. It takes a minimum of, a day and a half to make more cold brew. It's a shit show.
How do you how do you even
so
we're
standing there, it's at this point in time, like we were supposed to be done canning at like 10:30 at night. At this point in time it's 12. We're trying everything to salvage this. And Nate looks at me, he's like, I think the only way we're going to fix this is if somebody gets in there and pulls that bag out.
How big is the tank?
I want to say it's probably 200-gallon tank. So, and it's cold. It's cold. You know, it's 36 degrees because you have to brew it at 36 degrees. And it was a top load tank, and like it was barely just big enough around for like a human to fit into. But like it's tall enough to where like when I had to get in there, I'm submerged.
Yeah.
So I think there was 6 or 7 of these 60-pound bags that went in. They're wet now, so they're all over 100 pounds. Yeah. So I'm pushing them up, handing them out to Nate, and I get to that last one in there, and I'm like freezing, dude, fucking freezing. And I'm not realizing it at the time, but all this caffeine's soaking into my pores.
Oh, no shit. What?
And also we have to waste all this product, so I'm freaking out that I'm going to have to call and tell Dale this. I'm turning brown. I was dyed like coffee brown for 2 weeks. Like it looked like I got a spray tan. So the last bag, like I like go down there and I reef on it and it's not coming out. And I like come back up for air and I'm like down, you know, I'm probably 3 or 4 feet underneath the water line or the cold brew line, trying to get this bag dislodged. And it crosses my brain like, okay, when I get this dislodged, all this liquid's gonna be rushing out of this port and I'm gonna get sucked to the bottom and die. You know, like my foot's going to get stuck, suctioned to the bottom, and I'm going to die. So I like pop my head back out. I'm like, Nate, when I clear this bag and the cold brew starts gushing out, like close the butterfly valve immediately. He's like, okay. So I brace myself up against like the back wall of the tank, my feet on the wall, and I'm just pulling on this thing as hard as I can. Finally breaks free, and like, dude, straight up my butt sucks to the bottom of the thing, and he gets it closed, and I can like come back up for air.
Oh
and, like,
my gosh.
What?
So yeah, like probably the shittiest moment ever of my life at that point. Like, you know, I'm like, fuck, dude, we just wasted all this product, and I get out, and I'm butt ass naked in this tank, you know, so we have to like dump it all out, and I was like, dude, this is the worst day of my life. And Nate was like, I don't know, man. I'm not proud of it, but I've been to jail and that shit was pretty bad. And I was like, fuck, man. Well, that just gave me some perspective.
I needed to hear that right
it was
now.
like,
holy shit.
It just made me laugh, but I was also like, okay, you're right. Like, let's get this shit cleaned up and go home. So
you need to hear at 1 a.m.
Totally. And so that like spurred me into like being more focused on like, I don't want to can cold brew forever. Like this shit's cool, but like I want to focus on creative shit. Like starting to realize I am a creative person. So go home, finish this thing, a couple weeks later, pitch it to Dale, and, you know, sit there for probably 2 hours pitching him this 80-page document. Doesn't say much the whole time. And so we get to the end of it, and we're like, okay, we need to pitch this to all these other brands that are going to help make this possible. So we just need to know from you. Like, we don't need to know right now, but in the next day or two would be good. He's like, green light.
You're like,
And I was like, what? And he's like, green light, go.
Get out of my office.
Okay. It was like through Skype, dude.
Oh, no way.
Okay. So we like close the computer and me and Eldridge just look at each other like, what the fuck? Like losing our minds, dude. And then it got serious. So it's like, cool. Now we have to call all these brands. So I start picking off the brands. Not a single person that we had on the list told us no. We had like REI on board. Excuse me. REI, GoPro, Grizzly coolers, like all these massive brands.
So dope.
We got like close to 6 figures worth of free shit product. And so we're like stoked, you know, Goal Zero's sending us stuff, like all these cool companies. And so we get out on this trip and like start creating content, like doing cool shit. And yeah, I don't know. It was a little bit of a bumpy trip, but it was great. You know, it was so cool to like see that, like, again, that hard work like come to fruition, kind of like racing BMX again. It was like, it started turning into like, okay, like business to me now is like BMX. But then I start having this like identity crisis of, I'm so excited about like business and like growth there, but like, am I a BMX rider anymore? You know what I mean? Like it started becoming like this really tough thing of like, I'm still riding and I'm still riding at the same level, but like, I'm not as passionate about riding. I wouldn't say I'm not as passionate, but I'm more passionate right now about like creating business and like personal development and growth over here. So it's like, who am I? You know, like that's I've never felt that way my whole life up until getting there. Like I've loved one thing, now to have something else.
Well, during that time when you're having this crisis with regards to the BMX versus the creativity, were you thinking back like, well, hell, either way that I'm going right now, It's not that job. It's not that office job. It's not that 9 to 5 job. Like, were you even thinking about that, or was that just so far in your past?
Yeah, it was like so far gone. Like it almost didn't even register to me. Like even still to this day, like those jobs were so menial to me that they like don't register to me that I've even done them. You know, because my heart wasn't there. I just did it as a means to an end, so I could go ride my fucking bike. You know, like.
Do you think? Obviously, the better you get at something, the more the plateaus are a real thing.
Yeah.
And the harder it is to learn something new.
Yep.
You know, like I see it in mountain biking. Same thing with probably photography. You know, in the beginning, it's so you're like, oh, here's the f-stop here. Like you're learning so many little tricks, and then you know now to scare yourself on a bike, you got to get pretty gnarly. But
for sure,
do you think that the hot box, like you were learning so much and like you were growing obviously as a person?
Yep.
Was that like addicting? You know, that
oh yeah,
it was like BMX, like you have to go do the same trick 9,000 times to like perfect that little
it was
bit.
like walking over that starting hill for the first time. You know, it was like this whole new world of like, I've always been good at this stuff, but I didn't realize that you could make money doing this stuff, like the creative and like using your brain to like make cool shit happen. Like, and, you know, I was super fortunate because I was, you know, in Oscar Blues when Chad was there, so I'm like seeing how he's operating, and I'm getting to see how Dale's operating, and like seeing like how you can really make shit happen if you just fucking show the fuck up and like actually believe in it. So like the idea of like being like soulful or like putting your whole soul into doing something, like I'm looking at Dale and like that was his whole thing. He's like, he'd always say, you know, if you don't want to be here, there's the fucking door. Like nobody's forcing anybody to be here. Like you gotta want to be here. And that was like the cool part about that environment is like, you know, Dale was my boss, but like I didn't hear from him often, you know, like I was basically like pretty free range to do whatever I want. Like I kind of got to make the mistakes or like have those wins by myself. And like as going into that as a 23-year-old, like that's very rare, you know, that you like get a step into something and like have a bank card and just like figure it out. Don't fuck up.
A lot of responsibility.
A lot of responsibility. And so like, you know, I like to treat people's things like they're mine. So I was just like, cool, I'm going to spend this money like it's my own. Like, I'm going to be very cautious with it. I'm going to be, you know, if I went and I'm trying to start to look at things like wants versus needs, you know, and like, cool, I want that, but we don't need that. What do we need to make this business work or whatever? And so like shifting that mindset there, and then also being like, well, we could pay an agency to rebrand this company, or we could do it. Yeah. You know, and like I fortunately had Eldridge there to help me with like updating the website. Like his job before he moved back to Colorado was working on WordPress websites. So he kind of gives me the quick rundown of like how you work on WordPress. Like, fuck yeah, dude, that's sick. Now I understand how to do this roughly. Yeah. We came back from that trip and we didn't have the budget to keep paying Eldridge. So fortunately there was a job in marketing. So he went over there, and like, so I'm kind of back by myself. And this is at the time where, in this story of traction, we talked about how our second partner worked for Hotbox too. Yeah. So this was at the time where I connected with Jimmy Smith, and he was like, you got to hire this guy. He's so cool. So got him out there. He started working for us at Hotbox, and like there was like a whole new era of Hotbox because I could count on him to do, you know, the production, the roasting, the cold brew, doing all that stuff. And I could like sit on my computer and like, you know, work on those relationships or go do the sales or like start working on the higher level stuff of like, hey, this is going to be our next marketing thing, you know, and like really step back from the day-to-day production stuff. And like, as opposed to working in the business, I could work on the business, you know, and like didn't really understand that separation at the time. But I'm stoked that I like got to like work on and in, you know, having that free range to do that. And like, but I also like, you know, I if you follow me on Instagram, you know how much I fucking hate lobster font. And a big part of that hate is spawned from the fact that that was the font that was used for Hotbox. And it's just such a basic font. So that was something I always wanted to change. But it was so low level on like the totem pole. Like every time I told Dale, he's like, he doesn't give a shit about that. He's just like, dude, go out there and make sales. Like sales fix everything, totally. Right? And again, like I didn't understand that because like I wish at the time I would have been paying more attention to like the financial side of things, right? But I was just, all I cared about was like, what do we look like on Instagram? Yeah. Instagram's going to make us sell shit. I didn't fucking understand, you know? So now in hindsight, I see like where he would be like, dude, it doesn't matter what our fucking brand looks like.
It's already done.
Yeah, it's done. Like, just go sell the shit. But yeah, that's why I fucking hate lobster fonts so much, you know. And I like wanted to fix that so bad, and yeah, never got the chance to do that. So
I'm glad you have a good friend, 𝙍𝘾𝘼𝙍𝙍 to go back and forth about how much you hate lobster fonts.
Dude, the amount of people who actually message me though about like shitty fonts now is like hilarious.
Every time Chase posts, I'm like, yep, lobster font.
Yeah, tags me in the lobster font stuff. But yeah, it haunts me. But yeah, I mean, so I get this like crash course in business and marketing and design, and like again being inside of Oscar Blues, like I was there during, you know, like when Oscar Blues was still super core, and then they got acquired. So getting to live through that and seeing how big business operated in that like sense, and like seeing what positive things and negative things come of that. Like I just was in like the most perfect storm, you know, like I couldn't have paid for the education that I got through that, you know, and like being in such a place that like being soulful and being real, and you know, the word authentic fucking irks me, but like being authentic and being yourself, like that place was comprised of a bunch of people who were misfits, but like somehow all fit in there, and it was cool, you know. And like then the time comes to like, what am I going to do next when Dale approaches me and he's like, hey, I'm going to shut down Hotbox if you don't want to buy it. You know?
It's like damn near your identity at that. You'd put your heart and soul into it.
That's all I knew. You know, I was convinced that like the rest of my life was going to be at that company. I was like, this is, I didn't have any equity in it, but like for some reason I was so convinced like this is it. Like I was so like married to the idea of like making that thing so cool, you know, and we had a cool platform because we were attached to Oscar Blues. So like, in certain senses, sales were super easy, and like we didn't have to focus too much on like overall brand identity because Oscar Blues already had a pretty cool one. So we kind of just rode that wave, and like, yeah. But then Dale was just got to a point where the business wasn't making the money it should have. He had invested a lot of money, and he approached me. It was May of 2018, and he was just like, hey man, I know you love this thing. I've seen all the hard work, the passion, like I want to offer this company to you if you're interested in buying it. And of course I'm going to jump at that opportunity. And so I start trying to figure out how I can come up with the funds, and he was super supportive. He's like, we can be as creative as you want. You know, if it's monthly payments or whatever, one lump sum, you tell me, we'll work around whatever you think. And one of the guys that I was talking to that was going to help me with the funding, he was just like, you know, I've bought businesses before and I've sold businesses before, but if you're going to buy a business that you're this ingrained into, has every decision that's been made, like can you stand behind that? And I was like, holy shit, like that's something I never considered. And like, you know, it wasn't necessarily like Dale's fault, but the people that had come in to like run the company, like those guys, we called them the puffy coats because they always wore like puffy Patagonias, the NBA guys, and like they were the worst, dude. And like they just like were so disrespectful to so many people and like put so much bad energy out there that like he asked me that question. That was the first thing that popped into my brain. Like the amount of people that were pissed off
because of the puffy coats.
But because of the puffy coats, dude. And then like they were so disrespectful to the people in the brewery, so I didn't know what kind of conversations they were having when they weren't there. And like, I'm like, fuck, dude. Like, I guess I didn't think about that. So
can I make a side tangent? Could you imagine the MySpace music the puffy coats would have had?
Oh, dude, don't even get me started.
Nickelback. Nickelback,
brother.
Yeah, those guys were full on Nickelback bros.
All right, so he hits you with this truth. It's like, well, fuck.
Like, I'm like
maybe this is a bad idea.
Yeah, and I'm just like, shit, dude. Well, I go back to Dale and I'm like, well, are you sure you want to sell it? Well, I'm either going to sell it or I'm going to shut it down.
Yeah.
Fuck. Okay. So, you know, I'm starting to think like, what can I do? And like, we had a client that was in Scottsdale, Arizona, and they were buying shitload of coffee from us. And they called us one day and they're like, hey, we don't want to bum you out. We're starting our own roasting company. We just want to be transparent with you. But we're about 6 months to a year out from getting all the permits and getting all the stuff done. In the meantime, we're hoping that you can do like co-packaged roasts for us with our labels on it. So yeah, we can do that. And like, but here's the deal. We might not be around in 6 months or a year. We might not be around in a month. I don't know what's going on. And so the guy's inquisitive about it. He's like, what's going on? I tell him, well, is he willing to sell it to somebody else? Dale. I'm like, sure, I don't see why not. He's like, well, find out and let me know. So I call Dale. kind of tell him the scenario. And Dale's like, cool, yeah, tell him to come out. So the dude flies out the next day, like meets Dale, and like, you know, people are really good at putting up facades, and like I feel like I've always been good at reading people, but I was so hopeful that this was gonna work. Like there was a weird vibe, but I was just like, this has to work. This has to work. Not it's gonna work, it has to work. Because I had poured in at that point 3 years of my life, and like I wouldn't even say it was the years, it was the amount of hours and the blood, sweat, and tears. And like I'm neglecting my relationship with Cheyenne to like make sure this shit works. I wasn't riding my bike to make sure coffee's getting roasted and delivered, and like that this brand was operating, you know, so it had to work. And those guys start coming out a little bit more. They decide that it's something that they want to buy, so they set up like a 30-day due diligence period that was August 1st through September 1st, and they were going to spend that whole time there with us operating the company and just seeing how the day-to-day looked. And about halfway through that time, we realized that we did not fuck with each other. Like we just didn't see eye to eye, and like I have a really hard time with people who say they're going to do something and don't like actually follow through on it. And like, not to like talk down on anybody, but that's just like the kind of guys that they were. They just weren't like, they weren't following through. And yeah, the breaking point for that relationship was they wanted us to can cold brew on a Saturday, which that's fine, we'll do that. But they weren't interested in helping us can cold brew, but they were like standing under our feet while we were doing it. And I'm like tripping over these guys. Like, if you've ever canned product, it's usually the worst experience of your life. It's really hard. And canning cold brew is like probably one of the hardest things to do. It's like canning water. You can't rely on the carbonation like in a beer or a soda to pressurize the can. You have to use liquid nitrogen. So as the temperature of the cold brew changes, or the ambient temperature in the room changes, like you have a bunch of issues with getting firm cans. And like everything was going wrong. Like I'm covered in coffee, and these dudes are standing under my feet, and I like tripped over one of them because he was just like standing there trying to see what was going on. And I was like, all right, if you're going to be in here, you're either fucking helping or you're not in here at all.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was the breaking point for them. They just decided that they didn't want me around after that. So they were going to hire me on after they decided to buy the company. Make me sign a non-compete, and then fire me so I couldn't work in the coffee space for X amount of years, whatever the timeline was. So I'm glad I got the heads up on that one, you know, and didn't screw myself. And thankfully, right at the same time, like, you know, May-ish is when you had reached out about Traction.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we kind of got that ball rolling. And like, I was committed to helping you out from the beginning of Traction, but we didn't know what my role was going to be because I was still committed to doing Hotbox.
Yeah, I feel like it took a good 2 months to like let that kind of pan out.
Yeah, and like really set into what it was going to be, right? And like, yeah, we, you know, kind of went back and forth, and I was like helping you guys out, like you and our first partner, like figure out like just the small things, like, you know, where are we going to put a roaster, like costs, like things that I was familiar with Hotbox. And like, yeah, and then this whole thing came around, you know, end of September, and like, we had got the roaster, you know, everything was here, but we didn't like have anything else. And I just remember picking up the phone and calling you and being like, cool. So, yeah, I'm not working for Hotbox, so let's fucking go.
Green light.
Know? Yeah,
green light.
Yeah. We, you know, the fire was kind of smoldering, and we poured some fucking gas on it that day. And, you know, September, I think it was the end of August is when I went on that Crested Butte trip.
Yep.
And that's when I met 𝙎𝘾𝘼𝙍𝙬𝘿. So if you've listened to the original Traction Story podcast, our second one that we did, 𝙎𝘾𝘼𝙍𝙬𝘿 was a guy that I had met on the Tuesday night mountain bike rides. And he was on this Crested Butte trip, and he's always been such a cool dude to me, and like very like welcoming, and like just been a homie. And he asked like, what are you gonna do now? Like, he knew Hotbox was my baby. Like, I lived and breathed that thing. And like, he was one of the dudes that was around the whole time while I was doing that. You know, I stopped going on these Tuesday night mountain bike rides because I was working late on Tuesday nights and I couldn't go. Like, everybody saw me start to fall out because I was pouring so much time into this company. And so we had like a pretty like heartfelt conversation around the campfire, probably drinking some whiskey. And I was like, yeah, we bought a roaster, blah, blah, blah. We just don't know where to put it. And he's like, use my wood shop. And that's like, yeah, came back into service that next day, and I think I texted you, and I was like, "Yo, I think we got a spot.
Yeah.
Let's go and look at it when I get back home." And
yeah, we needed it so bad because we landed it in a brewery in a nice part of town, and to get the venting out, it was like $30,000. And it was just like, yep, I guess we don't.
That
have
was
a,
yeah, 30.
We don't have a coffee company.
$30,000 was more money than the roaster and the initial cash that we had to start the company.
Yeah, and it was just
combined, which is crazy to think about.
Yeah, we landed it, thought it was such a beautiful idea, beautiful space, and then it was just like, nope.
Yeah. So yeah, the roastery spot works out. Like at the same time, it's like, I think Eldridge was still living on my couch. I think so. I like came home and I was like, maybe not. Maybe I don't remember. I came home and I was like, okay, like we're starting this company. So we like filed the LLC and like we're talking about okay, like branding and website. And I was like, well, I can do that stuff. And then I started thinking about actually doing the branding, and like all I had done in Illustrator was colors, changing colors, which is fucking easy. It's like click and fill color, you know? So I'm freaking the fuck out. But I know that we can't afford to pay somebody. So I'm like, okay, well, start watching some YouTube videos and basically teach myself how to use Illustrator in like a few days. Like just smoking a lot of weed and drinking a lot of alcohol and putting myself in that hurt spot. You know, I'm depressed as fuck because my baby just got ripped from my freaking hands. Like Cheyenne's like wanting to come over and hang out, and I'm like, I need to be alone in my dark house and like figure this out.
You need to be creative.
And like within a 2-week span, I went from never knowing how to use Illustrator to designing the Traction brand, which is pretty fucking bizarre to think about.
So sick.
Like, you know, we talked about that sense of urgency. It's like, dude, now when I sit down to design something, like if it's a brand, it like takes me so long to get those wheels turning. And like I look back, and maybe I'll put some screenshots if you're watching this, but like I probably did, I don't know, 150 Traction logos because I didn't know what the fuck I was doing.
Yeah.
And the progression is really cool to see, like the first few art boards. Like I didn't even know how to use art boards, you know? Like you can see like the first few saves I have where it's like an art board and then just random design like off on the side. I didn't know. Like I didn't know how to size an art board, didn't know anything. By the end of it, we had the Traction icon. So, and I remember sending, there was 3 final logos, and I'm sure they're on, like I have a save of those 3 final ones that I sent to you and our first partner. And like, I remember you guys responding and being like, holy shit.
Yeah.
And it was, I had used a font that I wasn't in love with on the ones that I sent you. And then
but it wasn't Lobster.
It wasn't fucking Lobster.
Oh, okay, good.
That didn't even cross my fucking mind, if I'm being honest.
Be careful saying that word.
Yeah.
Kick your ass out.
I'll have to show you the rock lobster, baby.
I need to go down memory lane and see those again.
Yeah.
It's been a long time, obviously.
Well, I'll pull them up after this episode so I can take some screenshots. And I don't think James has ever seen them.
No, I haven't. Just the finalized one.
Yeah. So it's like cool to like look back on that and be like, holy shit, like how did I pull that one out of my ass, you know? And like, yeah, even like figuring out like what kind of font that I wanted to use, you know? And like, but I'm like, I had this like, you know, I was fortunate at the end of Hotbox to start coming into my own. Is like, I always kind of gravitated towards good design. So I started like figuring out like why I was gravitating towards those kind of things. Like why certain words were, you know, jumping out at me, or why certain fonts like jumped out at me. So like I had that base level. I just didn't know how to put those to action. So like then actually sitting in front of Illustrator and like being forced to do that, like my whole goal when we were designing Traction was like, how do we make something timeless? You know, like that was the thing that I always hated about Hotbox, is like it looks like it was designed like in the era that it was designed because it uses a shitty font that's like popular right now, you know, and in 5 years that font won't be used anymore and you'll know that it came from that era. So it's like I want something that could have been, you know, on a label in 1910 and it can be on a label in 200 years. So that was like the whole thought process. Like, how can this be something that is timeless, somewhat iconic? Like, I always loved the idea of like a brand that has like an icon that can stand on its own, like a Nike or like an Apple. And it's like, what is that for us? You know, so I'm like sitting there racking my fucking brain, and like what it turned into was the icon that we have now. So it's like the little tea tree kind of looking thing. And it initially started out as like the 3 partners, you know, it was me, Sean, and our first partner. And so we did 3 levels, and then it's a T for Traction, you know, and it kind of looks like a bike tread a little bit, but we didn't want it to be too bikey. Like we wanted to apply to everybody. And then as our first partner left, we were like, okay, well, you know, that initial concept of why the logo was made the way it was, like, doesn't make a ton of sense when we tell that story. So we're like, well, it makes a lot more sense if the bottom layer is the Traction family, right? And like, they hold up Sean and I. Like, how cool is that it works out like that? I never knew that. Yeah, so it's like 3-tiered for that reason, you know? And like, in the beginning, like, you know, the idea of like having a Traction family or anything like that was never something we could have imagined, you know? But as like that started to materialize and like people became part of Traction family, it's like, holy shit, like, none of this that we do would exist without that base layer. So like, yeah, that's like what it means to us now, which is super cool.
We covered it in the second episode about Traction, but yeah, just seeing people identify with the brand, seeing people with t-shirts on their back at the local trail spots in the grocery store. It's crazy. It just gives me goosebumps. And yeah, it's not something I ever imagined.
It's so bizarre. Yeah, you know, and like, that's like, I think it even goes almost one step further for me now, because I'm like, holy shit, like, I didn't even know how to design, and people are wearing that logo on their back and they're stoked, you know, and it looks good. I feel like most days that I never even made that, you know, like, it's weird. And like, seeing that shit, it's just like blows my mind, dude. Like,
did it with that urgency. It's like you give yourself 3 years or 3 months, you're going to do it in 3 months if you force yourself to.
For me, like, I tell you guys all the time, I always go back to, you know, the BMX thing. For me, it's like, I wouldn't have that mindset or that scope if it weren't for that era of, you know, growing up racing BMX, like, looking around being like, I want to be as good as all these guys. Like, now it's like, cool, I can't, like, I know if I just apply myself a little bit, like, you can learn anything you want to learn. And like, that's pretty cool that we live in a time that we can do that. Like, you know, 10 years ago, we would have been in a far different situation when it came to designing a logo, because YouTube wouldn't have existed. You know what I mean? Like, not in the way it does now with all the tutorials. So like, we'd have had to pay somebody for that. Like, it's crazy to think about that, you know? And like, yeah, I'm stoked that it worked out the way it did.
Same.
Like, we have a pretty unique brand because of that, you know? And like, I also like was able to not have a preconceived notion of design. So we were able to like build something. Like, you know, I talked to a lot of people who went to school for design, and like, they're like, when we first launched Traction, the amount of people I know that are like brand managers or designers that were like messaging me, like hyping up the Traction like brand design, and I felt like very self-conscious about it, because I was like, are these people fucking with me? Because like, that never happened at Hotbox, you know? I was like, I thought people were fucking with me. And now I'm like, holy shit, like, I actually made something that looked, you know, like,
isn't it being self-conscious so weird? Even like with roasting, like, for the longest time, it's like people tell you it's good, but it's like, are they just saying it because they like you?
Yeah.
You know, like,
just trying to hype you up.
Is one of my friends going to be like, dude, your coffee was shit? Yeah. You know what I mean? But it's like, it's the random people that, you know, post about it that truly like live it, and it's just like, that's coming off authentic, and I'm like, this is real.
Yeah. Well, it's all that imposter syndrome that we all get, right?
Totally. Yeah. Especially as like creators, you know, like, we never feel like it's good enough, you know? Like, it's kind of funny because, like, you know, I do it to myself a lot with writing clips, where I'll look back on a clip from like 5 or 6 years ago, when in the time I'm like, fuck, I hate that clip. And now I'll look back and I'm like, damn, I wish I could still 360 just like that. You know, it's like funny. Like, you're so critical of yourself. And like, I think that was the big thing when designing this brand. I was so critical of myself, and like, I'd never done anything like that before. So like, designing the packaging, I was just like, I don't know, this fucking sucks. And like, inadvertently, like, when I designed the 12-ounce bag labels, I didn't even realize that I did it, but like, I made it perfect so we can just cut the bottom off and use it for 5-pound bags. Like, that was not intentional, you know, but like, that taught me, you know, okay, next time I design something, think about designing it with that sort of intent, you know? And like, it's really cool to see, like, I would have never considered myself a designer, like, even a year ago, probably. But now I'm like, yeah, I'm a designer. You know what I mean?
Consider
like,
yourself a designer now?
I would say so, yeah. It's like, I love doing that. Like, you know, I was helping you out with some stuff for your brand, and like, I walked home, and like, I had that, we were talking in your new space, and like, this idea of like a cool logo for you popped into my head, and like, I had to go home immediately and work on that, you know? And like, I was able to crank that out, and like, you know, that whole board that I sent you took me like, can I put it in here so people can see it? Are you cool with
for
that?
sure. No, I think so, because it's going to be really interesting to see how that it develops from that.
For sure.
Know?
Yeah, like this is just a baseline, but it took me like less than an hour to put all that together.
Because things are clicking.
Yeah. But it's like crazy to think like, 3 years ago, that would have been weeks that it took me, and like same thing with like, all the other shit that I work on now with like website or whatever. It's like, it's so second nature to where like, sometimes I feel bad, like when we're having conversations and I'm like, why didn't you think about that? Dumbass, like, but I'm thinking about it for myself where I'm like, I'm so immersed in this world. Then I do it to like Cheyenne all the time. Like, I'm like, you should know that.
Yeah.
But like, it's hard to like take a step back and be like, oh dude, I didn't know that until, I did this every single day for blah, blah, blah. It's like, it is a tough thing. It's that perspective thing where it's like, the devil is in the detail with so many of these things. And like, getting lost in the sauce is usually pretty good, but
well, it also goes back to just like having that determination to race with the fast guys in BMX. Or hell, I'm gonna own this brand. I'm gonna build this brand into the best fucking thing I can do, and there's no other choice. This is the only thing. I'm gonna make this, and I'm gonna beat myself up and be the best that I can.
Yeah,
right.
Like, I think that's like the thing. The older that I'm starting to get, that I'm starting to realize more and more. It's like, if you see it as there's no other option, we talked about it when we started Traction. I don't think we've talked about it on one of these podcasts, but like not having a plan B, like we don't have a plan B right now. We're so fucking in deep with this project that it's like crazy to think about, how deep we are. And like, we're doing it with our whole ass soul, like every piece of you and I is ingrained into Traction. Traction exists the way it does because of your whole story, my whole story being meshed together and like building together from there. It's like pretty bizarre to think about that. Like every piece of our life up until the point of starting Traction is like a culmination of why the brand is the way it is.
Totally.
And then and then as we've grown into, being adults over the last few years, like actual adults, it's like cool to see like our perspective on the brand start to change and be like, cool, we can like really like do something if we do it this way, It was
funny. I know there was like a turning point where we kind of started getting cutthroat with each other, not with each other, but just about the brand. We're like, dude, we have the most amazing Traction family. We're working with these Red Bull athletes. Like, if we fuck this up, we should never start anything again.
Totally.
Like, if we don't put the work in right now and deliver, like we have so much support from the raddest people. Like, what are we doing?
Well, I think that's like the coolest thing, right? It's like we're aware of that.
Yeah.
I wasn't aware of that at Hotbox.
Yeah.
I wasn't aware of what the network was like, and we have it tenfold here now, and like we know every athlete that we'd ever want to work with. Shit, we're probably, like I think about it a lot. It's like we're probably one person away from like knowing the president of the United States. Like, it's crazy to think about like how tied in with people we are from all walks of life.
Yeah.
And so if we don't activate on that, like that is our fault.
Oh, 100%.
You know what I mean? And it's really cool to have that level of accountability to be like, if this doesn't work, it's nobody else's fault. It's not the economy. It's nothing else. We fucked up.
Yeah.
And like that's a lot of ownership, like that's cool that we're able to like roll it back. And like, I want more people to look at their work and like see that, it's like, dude, you're more powerful than you think you are.
Yeah.
Because like it is that imposter syndrome that we talk about so often. It's like, you're way better at doing things than you think you are. And if you're not, just show the fuck up. Because like at this point in my life, I can't even think, like I'll like do something on my bike and like Cheyenne will be like, how did you do that? I'm like, I don't know. Like she'll like ride my BMX bike and like try and do a manual or something, and she's just like, doesn't make sense to her. But like there's not, in my brain, I can't remember a time of not being able to do that.
Yeah.
But it's because I've done it so many fucking times, like, so like if you just put in the work, you are pretty powerful. Like it will come, like we're fortunate that we've gotten to see that in real time though.
Yeah. I think that's the thing with like racing. It's like every racer goes through like the woe is me. It has a excuse of why they did bad. This dude cut me off. The wind, the whatever. And it's like the better you get, the more you're like, I just didn't go fast enough.
Yeah.
It took me a long time.
I didn't commit enough,
Yeah, I didn't train enough. And I think that's becoming an adult. Like as a kid, it's so easy. And it's probably something that we learned through BMX. And just getting our teeth knocked in. It's like, hey, if we mess up, it's on me.
Yep.
You know, it's
or
no one
like
else.
you know, taking like seizing the day. Really, you know, like there's one thing like that's been fucking with my brain a lot lately. It's like I'm turning 30 next month. So June 27th.
Old,
I know.
So old, bro.
But like, here's what's been fucking me up is like, I always told myself that I would be able to do a bunny hop tail up on my BMX bike when I'm 40 years old.
Yeah.
And that's a trick. For some reason, in the last few years, I just can't do it. And I'm always like, I'll try it again tomorrow. And I won't even try it when I ride. Like, so I'm like in Connecticut this last weekend, and I was just like, it was going through my head. It's like, oh, I can try tomorrow. Yeah. Like, you're on a trip right now. Don't get hurt. Like, just try tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, fuck, dude, I've been telling myself for the last 2 years an excuse every day. Like, I'll try tomorrow. And so I was like, set my phone up. I was like, fuck this. I'm doing it right now. And just like, dude, it snapped around and came underneath. Yeah, first try.
I watched that on the Instagram. I was like, damn, boy.
Dude, that was first try. And I was just like, holy shit. But like, you know, that comes full circle to just being like, dude, take advantage of the day and fucking learn something new or scare the shit out of yourself a little bit. Like, because usually it pans out pretty well, you know, and like, but like I'd been putting that shit off for 2 years, you know, thinking like, oh, tomorrow will be a better day. My back won't hurt as bad tomorrow. Like, there's an excuse every single day. So like being able to just like show up and be like, hold yourself accountable, you know, it's a hard thing to do.
It's funny, unless you're scared, uncomfortable, you're not growing. And it's just like so many people ask me about training, and I'm just like, pedal up that hill as most uncomfortably as you can. If it feels comfortable, you're not trying hard enough.
Well, I think especially like when you think about training, right? Like, so many people have this perspective of like, oh, when you're fit, it doesn't hurt.
Oh yeah.
You're like, no, it hurts just as bad. I'm just going faster.
Exactly. But it's like with anything, right? Like that tail whip or the design work, like, all right, I have 2 days to get this done. It's so uncomfortable. It's so stressful, but you like learn so much. Yep. It's like, I feel like anything, like if you're not uncomfortable in some way, you're not moving forward.
Well, I was talking to a client that I had a couple of years ago down in Colorado Springs, and he hit me up about doing another shoot for him. And I was so proud to tell him, because he's an arborist. He started his company. He was telling me today he started his company in this tiny little garage that he rented out, you know, and he put all his chainsaws, hung up all his ropes, and now he's a huge company. This dude is no joke. And I was proud to tell him, I was like, I just got a new spot and blah, 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 and I'm building it out. And he's just like, dude, if you're not making yourself uncomfortable, then what the fuck are you doing with your life? You're never going to progress unless you throw yourself in at that deep end and you sign that lease on that space that's too big for you right now. And you're like, holy shit, I better hustle to get this work.
Only one way to make this work.
That's it. There is no other. There's no plan B.
And talking about like, you know, if you're comfortable, you're not growing. But like on the adverse side of that, like we talk about it a lot with riding. But like in every situation in life, like if you're comfortable, that's what's going to get your ass killed. Yeah. You know, when you're comfortable riding a bike and you're not thinking about like
your nose bunk from bull to bull, maybe.
Yeah, you get knocked out, you know, like, but that's with anything in life. The second that you sit back and you're comfortable and you get lackadaisical, like that's when bad shit happens, you know, and like that's when you get the most bummed out. Like for myself, like dude, from a young age, like I've always dealt with like being like depressed or like serious, like pretty heavy mental health shit, and like growing up, like trying to figure out how to deal with that. Like thankfully I had a bike, but then you know you get hurt and like you can't fucking deal with that shit. Like I've had to learn for myself, it's like the only way that I like can outpace that is by making myself uncomfortable and like doing the shit that does make me happy, like going out and talking to people and like just not feeling bad for myself, you know. It's like, but that's like the hard shit to realize, like
not allowing yourself to be in a position to take the time to lay in the bed or whatever and like get your FOMO from spinning through Instagram and being all like, fuck it, I'm getting up right now. 1, 2, 3, go. I'm up. Okay, what's next?
It's that high level of accountability, you know, and like that's like something like in the last few years where I'm like, I feel myself struggling less or like thinking less bad thoughts because I'm just like, you don't have a choice. Like just get the fuck up and go, you know, and like do the shit that makes you happy and like stop eating shitty food that makes you feel bad. Or like, you know, if I drink a lot, I'm like, man, why am I so bummed? I'm like, oh, it's because I've just been drinking booze. Like, and I can't do it. Like I'm hungover, whatever, you know. It's like then those thoughts like creep back into my head. I'm like, I hate feeling like that.
I think as humans, we're not made to just be in a box, right? Like we're made to be outside and just around nature. And I can see it. Like you're saying, you're inside, comfortable. I get depressed immediately. Like 2 days inside, I'll go nuts.
When it's something, it's funny because I always crave that, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, dude, I just want to like sit around and do nothing for a day.
Yeah.
And then I do that, and I'm like, dude, what the fuck? I can't stand this.
Yeah. And then I snap out of it, and it's like so many people that I see, they get stuck in their house, they get depressed, and I'm just like, all you gotta do is get out, you know, like. Yeah.
But it's so hard to break out of that because like I know when I'm in that position, I'm like, somebody's like, oh, come have a beer. I'm just like, make up any excuse to not go or whatever. Sure. You know, it's so fucking hard and like hard to get out of that mind state. But yeah, I think it's just like coming to a point of like keeping us like that's only for myself. I have to keep myself accountable, you know, and like have a task to work on. Like life is busy enough where if you can't find something to work on, like you're not looking hard enough, you know, or something that'll like fill your cup. You're not looking hard enough. And like, I don't know. I feel fortunate. I think we all feel fortunate that we've had stuff that kind of like fell in our lap that like we were passionate about. And like we've, you know, found other passions through the thing that fell in our lap. Like, and we found it from a young age. Like how cool is that? But yeah, I don't know. It's tough, dude. And like, yeah, just struggling with that. It's hard, dude.
Totally.
That's like even lately too, is like trying to get out of my head, like chasing that perfection thing. Right. Yeah. Like, especially with like a business, like, you know, I remember Dale telling me one time. No, was it Dale or Boguski? I can't remember. I think it was Boguski. Yeah, he was like, if you can live in the space of knowing that something's always going to be wrong, then you're going to be happy. But if you're always chasing like that moment of like, you know, for us right now, it's like trying to find this cold storage space for cold brew. Yeah. And what's it going to be tomorrow now that we've got that figured out? Like always knowing that something's going to be fucked up and just like embracing that and like just being a problem solver. Like I think it's as a society or as people, we always get so stuck in trying to like chase perfection. And like, dude, we've never felt perfection. Nobody's ever felt that. No. But we're chasing that. Yeah. And people are so sad because they're chasing perfection all the time.
Something that's not real.
Yeah. Nobody's ever felt perfection. So why do we chase that? And like, that's like something the last like few months, like, I'm like, dude, I'm like, why have I always chased that? Like, I want to chase joy. I want to find things that make me happy, like inside. But like, I'm not trying to be like, oh, that company looks perfect over there. So let's be like them. Totally. Like, because they're not. Like, I've worked for enough companies. We all have that. We all know that every company is fucked up, you know?
Oh, hell yeah.
And everybody's life is crazy, too. Like, nobody has a perfect life.
Oh, no. But yeah, go.
No. So I was going to kind of start wrapping this up with regards to kind of like, so obviously there's a lot of future with traction and stuff, but as far as Michael himself, what does the future hold? Like, is the...
Yeah, I mean, we've got a lot of fun things in the work. Obviously, like a lot of shitload of work to do still with Traction and our new business, Espresso Forge. Cheyenne is retiring from teaching this year. So what is today? Today's Wednesday. Tomorrow's Cheyenne's last day teaching.
Yeah.
No way.
So she's been a teacher for 6 years, which is pretty bizarre. Like, so I'm pretty stoked for like that new adventure. You know, like July will be 3 years of us being married, which is bizarre. So I think this is going to be like, this is the first summer that like she like doesn't have to go back to school in 6 years. Like, so we can like really like embrace like being entrepreneurs together and like being able to like, you know, travel and do shit together kind of whenever, which I'm pretty excited about. Her and I are starting like a small, like pretty boutique, like creative agency, which will be super fun. So
which helping, I'm reaping the benefits
You're one of our first people that we're helping out with stuff. So, like, yeah, that'll be super fun. And, like, you know, I think through this whole Traction journey and Espresso Forge, like, I'm starting to really figure out, like, where I fit into, like, the business world. And I really enjoy, like, creating brands and, like, making stuff very linear and, like, very focused, hyper-focused on details, right? And so being able to provide that for people and, like, still like grow our brands and do really cool shit with them, but also like be able to give people that are getting into business or rebranding their stuff like a platform that is put together and like packaged very nicely. And like that's a hard thing as a business owner, like to look at, you know, or like to be focused on. So being able to offer those services is going to be super fun. And yeah, and just trying to ride fucking bikes a little bit more. Like
Hop Whip at 40.
Yeah, Hop Whip at 40. I'm like trying to talk myself into doing 30 Hop Whips on my 30th birthday.
There you go.
But yeah, we'll see. I mean, I filmed that. The one that I put in that video on Instagram, that was that was first try, but the camera was off a little bit. Like I'm kind of off in the corner, so I had to crop it in. So I was like pretty displeased with that. So I like did another one, and the camera fell down. So I had to do I did 3 in a row.
That's good.
But I was psyched. Like they all came around. Like the third one I filmed, I didn't use because my feet didn't go straight back to pedals like they did on the first one. Like the first one was fucking perfect, but yeah, I don't know. Hopefully like that's a thing. I don't know. Turning 30 is pretty fucking scary. Like I had a realization like as COVID started that I was closer to being 40 than I was to being 16. And that really fucked me up for a little bit because
it fucks me up every day.
Because I feel like I'm still 16, like mentally.
We all
like,
are.
You know, I still do this, ride my bike like I did when I was 16. So that gives me hope, you know. But yeah, being closer to being 40 than I am to 16 is like, it's a pretty hectic thing to think about, you know. Like think about when you're 16 years old, thinking about somebody being 30. Like, damn, that dude's a freaking dinosaur.
Pretty old, yeah.
You know, so
16 though, woof.
Yeah,
I don't want to go back.
No. I'm pretty. I told Cheyenne was like 2 days ago. She had like bought a candy bar and like had it in the fridge, and like I was working and like there was no food, and like saw this candy bar in the fridge, and it was like 8 in the morning. Like eat the candy bar, and I think it was last night she came home. She's like, "You ate my candy bar?" I was like, "Yeah, I ate it for breakfast." She's like, "Are you fucking kidding me?" I was like, "Dude, being an adult is so cool. Like, I can eat candy bars for breakfast and I don't get in trouble."
I'm
like,
not 12 anymore, Mom.
Yeah, I love being an adult, dude. You can do whatever you freaking want. Like that, there's some beauty in that.
There is.
Being an adult's hard, but doing whatever the fuck you want is pretty dope. So
sick.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for opening up.
Yeah.
It's been a fun one. And any parting words? Any words of advice?
Yeah, I mean, I think giving a shout out to my mom and my stepdad Tony and my dad and my stepmom Christy, like they did a lot of shit for me, and like they put up with me being a fucking idiot for a really long time. So shout out to them because they helped me ride bikes and like sent me some really cool places. And yeah, I don't know, without that I would probably be in a pretty bad place right now. So
shout out to the fam.
Big shout out to them, and like obviously massive shout out to my wife Cheyenne, because she fucking makes me do uncomfortable things, and she supports me doing really reckless things all the time. And yeah, if it wasn't for her, like I wouldn't be able to do the traction thing, because you know, financially we haven't gotten paid in 3 years, and she's been able to like help me through that. So she's a trooper, man. Big shout out to her. And like, yeah, I don't know, parting words, man. I don't know, don't chase perfection, it's not real.
Perfect.
Yeah, ride the wave, dude, and just show up and smile every day. I don't know, not much else you can do, right?
That's right. All right, boys.
Here's
Another
the next
successful one.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Thanks for doing this twice.
This one was definitely better.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, definitely better.
Thank you guys for helping me do it again. I feel really bad that we had to do it again, but yeah, fuck yeah, this was fun.
If I ever fuck up, I'm gonna be like, yeah, I messed up a mic. Can we redo it?
Well, yeah.
All right.
We'll wrap it up now. Keep being scared of normal. We'll see you guys on the next one.
Peace.
Later.